Metaphor ReFantazio, a game I've had my eye on for a while now, but wasn't sure when I would get to play it. Now that I have, I figured why not express my opinions on the game, the story, mechanics, etc. First off, I am not the biggest Atlas fan, but I do love the style they bring to their games. I've played Persona 4, Persona 5, and Catherine, and I'm not completely out of the know with the Shin Megami Tensei series, but I've never played one. So going off the Steam review saying this is fantasy Persona, I figured I knew what I was getting into. I'm going to be going into this as spoiler-free as I can, and all the footage is from the prologue and chapter 1. But there may be some hinting to how the game handles everything in the late game, but I'll put a warning up. To mention the Steam reviews again, Fantasy Persona is kind of the perfect way to put it. Metaphor is a JRPG with social and time management mechanics, just like Persona, but fantasy. During the day, you have your choice of leveling up your social links and social abilities, or traveling to a dungeon to progress the main story, or doing side quests. Pretty simple stuff. If you've played Persona, you know this song and dance. Combat is turn-based, with each side taking their respective amount of moves before swapping turns. But using any kind of weakness on the enemy will grant you an extra half turn, which is basically another turn, but there's some differences that make it a half turn. This mechanic also applies to the enemy's attacks as well. So knowing what you can do, what your party's weak to, and knowing what the enemies are weak to is almost mandatory for success. A very Persona, very Shin Megami Tensei mechanic. What this game does differently is the archetype system. Unlike Persona, you are not collecting Little Jack Frost to fuse and attach to your character. In Metaphor, all of your characters can swap around to the jobs you've unlocked for them and attach the learned abilities over to another class. This removes the complexity of Persona collecting and fusion, but replaces it with a system that's more for me. I found this more easy to understand, but it had its own complexities too. I really enjoyed job change mechanics, and this one very much reminded me of Bravely Default. I could never get my head around the Persona fusion without looking up guides, so this is a nice change. Very easy to understand. And with the whole game essentially being on a timer, it does add a bit of challenge to how you build your characters. Something that I wasn't too huge on was the dungeons. There's nothing really too special about them. Pretty standard dungeon crawling experience. So it's not like they're offensive in any way. Personally, I was hoping for something similar to Persona 5's Mementos. Just like a big area with a ton of floors to explore. But what we have in Metaphor are a handful of bite-sized dungeons with some pretty light puzzle-solving elements. Something I would have liked to have seen explored more is the randomized gear you can find. Very similar to Diablo, you find unidentified equipment that you can then identify when you return to town. In my playthrough, I rarely found anything good, and when something worthwhile did pop up, it was very few and far between. To briefly go back to the Mementos idea, I think an endlessly explorable tower area with tons of randomized loot would have been a fun idea for this game. But I can see how that could affect the more strategic elements to team builds and upcoming enemies and bosses. Like if you found a ton of good gear, but the next boss counters the classes they're for, making the whole randomized experience element not really worth it. Just a fun idea. What we got in the game isn't bad, just nothing really special. Also, there's a tutorial that tells you to destroy these red crystals, but if you're not abusing them, you are not going to be equipped for the end game. Since I'm not going into spoilers, I'm only going to briefly talk about the cast of characters as a whole. And in general, I like the cast we have. The character design across the board was really unique, and even with the more wildly different looking characters, nobody felt awkwardly out of place. I really enjoyed my time with the main cast and leveling up their social links throughout the story. One thing that stood out to me though was that everyone had very simple looking outfits, like a lot of flat colors. But I think this was to highlight the glowing effect your characters have in battle. If the characters' outfits were more complex, I think it would start to look really muddy with everything put together. Gallica as the mascot character is really good. For my own personal ranking, I would put her somewhere between Aegis and Teddy. Social Link stories, on the other hand, were pretty hit or miss for me. I found myself only liking a couple of them and the characters. Some of the other ones felt kind of forced and uninteresting. I was only emotionally interested in one, which probably isn't a good thing if you're playing a JRPG, but that one was really good, and I'm not really judging the rest of the game off this, since social links are just really another number you're trying to max out for more power. It's just a shame I didn't find the non-main character stories more engaging. Now, this is where things are going to get dicey. To go into this without going into spoilers at all, I'll just say the story is good. It's totally fine. My problem with the story is that you could tell it in any other game and it would not matter. This is a fantasy JRPG, but the story is very grounded and real. It plays around with some pretty relevant topics. I was hoping for something a little more fantastical. The game does have those moments, but they don't stick around for that long and aren't really relevant to the main conflict. Some of the elements definitely feel more at home in a fantasy setting, but you could totally rewrite it in a way that fits into a Persona high school setting. And I don't want to talk about spoilers, so I'll keep this brief. I'll put a warning on screen just to be safe. But with this being an Atlus game, you can expect the story to get a little twisty, and it does. It doesn't get twisty enough for me, and the twist did not really change the course of the character's end goal. Another reason I feel the game lacks in fantasy elements is because this game has a Final Fantasy XIII style data log section. If the characters ever bring anything up and you're missing context, or certain aspects of the game just feel not explained, this is where that is. And I don't really like that the story glosses over these things only to flesh it out more in an optional menu. I would rather the story elements be more direct and provide all the context needed, for the story to flow seamlessly without any extra work. This story tries to deal with a lot and doesn't really give time to deal with everything. I would have preferred a more streamlined story. And again, the story is not bad. There are some very weak moments that are seemingly irrelevant, but overall, I enjoyed it enough to see it through. You could probably tell I was not the desired audience for this game. There are tons of Atlus references scattered throughout the game, and I could only point out a few. But looking more into it, it does seem that Metaphor was a love letter to longtime Atlus fans, which I am unfortunately not. I do like Persona, but that's as far as I can really push it. I did really enjoy the class building element. It was probably the best part of the game for me. It does go a little crazy with all the menus early on to mid-game, but does lighten up later on. And some of the characters in this game I think are the best out of Atlus's RPGs, for the ones that I've played, that is. It's just unfortunate that some of the elements feel lackluster in comparison to other games out there. Some of the animated cutscenes just look awkward. I would have preferred more in-engine cutscenes. Those looked amazing. The music is just not there. The game has like 2 good tracks. The rest is just for the birds, which is probably why they sell the Persona themes and costumes. And I probably would have had a better time with the game if I had Persona songs playing, I picked this game up on a sale. If I'd paid full price, I probably would have been more upset with its shortcomings. But if you like Persona and haven't played this, I would recommend picking it up on a decent sale price. If I had to give a number score on this, I would give it a 7 out of 10, but it's a very loose 7. If the music, story, and dungeons were a bit better, I could bump this up to an 8. But if you ask me about this game on a bad day, I could easily drop it to a 6 or 5. To me, this is not Game of the Year material. If you're waiting for Persona 6, it's a good filler game. It's at least good for that one run, but I'll probably never boot it up again. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching. Going to be trying out a handful of different kind of videos for this channel. So if you liked it, leave a comment. If there's anything to change or improve or I could add, definitely let me know. I ended up getting sick halfway through recording, so if I sound different after a certain point, that's why. And I'm still figuring out the audio, trying to figure out how to get rid of mouth sounds, which I've mostly gotten rid of, but it's pretty tough, you know, to get it perfect, but I'm working on it. Anyway, if you liked the video, leave a like, comment, subscribe for more if you liked it. Also still figuring out how to end these videos, so I'm just gonna go.